What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another 10 minutes with Matt. And did you just feel a breeze in here? It's because I'm talking about the draft. I'm not talking about draft beer or the first draft of a script or a military draft. I'm talking about the NBA draft, a process in which NBA franchises select players above the age of 18 to come play for their respective squads. And what I want to talk about today is the people behind the madness of the NBA draft. And those people are called general managers and more broadly front offices. Is there a back office? No one knows. And that's kind of the thing, is there's a lot of mystery around these individuals that are tasked with putting NBA rosters together. You know, like, what do they do all day? Are they on ESPN NBA Trade Machine like I am? Do they go to 2K Trade Finder? Are they just talking to each other all the time, like, I'll trade you such and such for such and cash considerations and whatever? You know, do they have a spreadsheet with all their potential picks on it, with all those conditions where it's like, oh yeah, if the Thunder, wins 6 games in January and SGA scores over 22 points a game and the Thunder end up at the 9th seed, then we get their second round pick in 2024. I don't know who keeps all that straight. Imagine there's some interns. Probably Microsoft Excel is involved. But part of it too is trying to evaluate these guys because, it's hard when a guy like Danny Ainge makes some great moves. Think about trading back for Jason Tatum, the Jaylen Brown pick, Terry Rozier pick. And then you have, Romeo Langford's barely played since being drafted at 14. Gershon Yabusele was a mid-first round pick, didn't pan out. James Young. And, you're trying to make sense of this because some picks have been so bad, some have been so good. It's like, how do we evaluate Danny Ainge as a general manager? And so what I did was I went back in time, as I often do, looking at every pick 1 through 60 since 2009. So for context, that was when Blake Griffin was picked number 1 overall, Hasheem Thabeet right after him. And I basically scored each pick using this table. So as you can see, I looked at player role, and that's on their current team or generally just talent level where they should be at. And then considering, where they were selected in the draft. So if you're a top 5 pick, you're going to have to at least be a starter for me not to penalize you as a GM, for making that selection. But if you get a star or a superstar at that point, then, that's a reward because you really went above and beyond. But you generally need a starter. You need someone that's integral to your team if you have a top 5 pick. And then going from there, you get rewarded more if you get a great player later on. It's kind of self-explanatory. The second round is kind of a crapshoot. So if you even get a guy that makes the roster 1-2 years later from the second round, that's sick. So, because that doesn't happen very often. A lot of the time, it's some guy you draft overseas that never shows up, or someone that plays like one summer league and then goes overseas. And you're like, all right, well, that was our second round pick, I guess. So you get rewarded for that. And that's kind of how it works. So I scored every pick since 2009, and I basically compiled them to see which teams, scored the most points over that span. And so my findings I will now report to you. And the number 1 team is the Los Angeles Lakers. And all those guys down in Beantown just booed at me because they're watching this live. It's the Lakers, which is crazy, really. I don't know if that comes as a surprise to you, but it did a little bit to me because you don't think about them as having kind of that signature pick where they were like, wow, the Lakers really stole that guy that year or whatever, and here they are. And part of that is because they only have 2 guys on their team right now that they drafted in Kyle Kuzma and THT. But those were solid picks. And then you go back, you look at Brandon Ingram, top 5 pick, turned out to be an all-star. Julius Randle at 7, turned out to be an all-star. D'Angelo Russell at 2, turned out to be an all-star. Granted, none of them made the all-star team while playing for the Lakers, but clearly they saw the potential in them. And one of the biggest parts of this, I made a video about, if you want to contend for a title, you got to do it through free agency or through trades. But, the importance of the draft comes in that if you have, 3 to 4 really successful picks, that gives you a ton of trade capital to make a move for a big star. And that's exactly what the Lakers did when you hit a pick on Ingram. You hit on Josh Hart in the second round. Lonzo Ball at 2, he's a solid starter, was also a major trade piece. So they didn't miss on anyone. Lonzo Ball probably is their biggest miss, but he's still a starter. You give him a 0. It sucks that Tatum went right after, that they missed on him. But at the end of the day, just isolated, that's how the pick works. And with some teams, when you look at, a guy like Kawhi Leonard, who was technically drafted by the Pacers, then got traded to the Spurs, I gave those points to the Spurs because at the end of the day, he started the season with them. They saw the talent, they made a move for him. And on the flip side, a guy like Chris Middleton was actually drafted by the Pistons and then traded before, he was an all-star that we know today. So the Pistons actually they're tied for 8th. They had 7 points. The Lakers led with 18 total points. Pistons, now this is just evaluating drafts. They they draft Spencer Dinwiddie in the second round, Chris Middleton. Then they move those guys. They didn't keep them, which is an interesting thing. It's not always about drafting the right guy. It's also about, do you believe in him, and are you giving him environment to really develop and become a better guy? Because that kind of sometimes happens time in and time out with all those Lakers guys too. A change of scenery sometimes can be all the difference for a guy's development. And so if we look at now, we see the top Lakers. The Nuggets are up there because Nikola Jokic, that was like a 5-point pick right there. You get a superstar in the second round. The flip side, can you guess the team at the bottom? I'll give you a second. It's the Phoenix Suns. And I'll mention 2 of their biggest kind of busts in Dragon Bender, Josh Jackson. Josh Jackson's still in the league, can still put up some points. But, it says a lot when you're 4th overall pick, you don't end up keeping them. You don't trust the guy. The Suns have been through so many coaches. It was a really tough kind of environment, but now they're turning around, obviously, this season. And I think it goes to show, you don't have to hit on every single draft, but it is extremely important to try to at least get that 0 score. Get at least a starter in the top 5, get a contributor, a guy that can come off the bench, early in games in like the lottery. And then late first round, just get a guy can contribute, can be a role player at least, because once you get in those negative points, this can add up pretty quickly. But it's not impossible. DeAndre Ayton, say what you want about him. Obviously, Luka and Trae Young going after him doesn't help his case, but he's been a great piece for them this season. He's performed well his entire time there. Devin Booker was a great pick. Cam Johnson, seemed to be a reach at the time, but right now he's contributing to, a top 5 team in the West. So if you can string a couple good ones together, you can make, a solid roster, especially with Chris Paul coming in another move. And suddenly the Suns are, a great team. Another one down there is the Timberwolves, though, on the flip side, where, they have some talent. They have they got Cat as a number 1 pick, Russell a number 2, Ant Edwards a number 1, Jarrett Culver was a top pick. And so they haven't figured it out yet. They still got a lot of time. Those guys are all young, but they've missed quite a bit, and they don't have the environment to develop. So when we're evaluating GMs, we have to think about some of these things, about environment, about fit. Sometimes it's not always their fault, but I think, when you look at the Lakers, done a great job selecting picks and not missing based on where they're selecting, whether it's early in the first round, even getting some second-round guys like THT. They drafted Zubac. Thomas Bryant, we forget, was a Laker. And on the flip side, the Suns, if you miss top 5, that's going to kind of derail you for a little bit. But you can always get back on track. We're going to end on a hopeful note that even if you miss a guy, you get some guy overseas, doesn't pan out for you early on. DeAndre Ayton's here. Devin Booker's here. Chris Paul is here. Thank you for watching 10 Minutes with Matt.